first of all, we should say that Divergent is also, like The Hunger Games, a young adult dystopian trilogy. So there are 3 books. The first book is called Divergent. The second book is Insurgent. And the third book the title has yet to be revealed, but the book is coming out. Is it later this year or next year?
It's this year. It's actually October 22nd of this year.
Okay. So the third book comes out in October. The title is much anticipated, but it has not yet been unveiled.
It's not Detergent, though, right? Can you confirm that for us, Ashley?
I can confirm that.
And
that would have been great, though.
And the author is Veronica Roth. And we've mentioned Divergent a couple of times in the past on this show, just in some of our conversations about YA literature, but we've never really had a full discussion about it. So, Ashley, if you are willing, will you kind of give us and our listeners just a sort of brief summary about what Divergent consists of? What is Divergent all about? What can they expect when they open up this book?
Okay, well, in Divergent, there are 5 factions, like we've talked about, and they're based off of just kind of various virtues, sort of, and there's the selfless, the peaceful, the intelligent, and the honest, and the brave, and you're very much restricted to just one. You have to choose one when you turn 16, and that's right before, right when we, open the book. Triss, the protagonist, is approaching 16, and she has to make this very difficult choice that really determines her future, and that really kind of sets the stage for the whole book. I don't want to give too much away for those that haven't read, but that's the general idea.
Right, and it's similar, I think, in that way to The Hunger Games, because it starts out with a 16-year-old protagonist who, leads a very kind of normal lifestyle. Especially in the case of Triss, she's in the abnegation faction, and their virtue is selflessness. So she lives a very, very simple, no-frills kind of lifestyle, and she's about to be sort of thrust into this stage that's so much more than anything she's ever seen and experienced before. And in that way, it's very similar to what Katniss goes through in The Hunger Games. And, of course, Triss ends up playing quite a big role in I'm trying to think of how to discuss this without spoiling too much, but Triss does end up playing quite a huge role in the society, which is very much dystopian. So even though sort of on the surface this society doesn't seem all that bad, we've got these 5 factions that seem to run fairly well. As Ashley said, each one is based on a human virtue, and aren't virtues good things? So I'm just asking you,
right.
What is it that we discover that makes this society dystopian?
Right. Okay. So basically, as I think is the case with anything in life, you need some degree of moderation. And even great virtues, as you said, if they're practiced with too much of an iron fist and with no wiggle room or no gray area, things get a little bit uncomfortable. And the more that happens, and also anything can be manipulated for one person's goal. Someone who wants power can use, and when you go through the 5 factions, the erudite, right, for those who value knowledge. Well, knowledge is a great thing, right? But what happens when people obsessively want to use knowledge in ways that are no longer safe, or in ways that are, quite frankly, dangerous and hazardous to other citizens within the community? Take Amity. Those are the ones who believe in peace. But what happens when there's a real conflict where they're needed to play a role and they're just not interested because all they care about is acting like hippies? I know that was a very one way to sum it up.
That's pretty accurate, yeah.
Or we'll take one, Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the notions that personally drew me in with Divergent is that, as human beings, I personally don't feel that we can be confined to just one way of thinking or behaving, and that's really how this society kind of runs, and that really doesn't really mesh well with my thinking, so that just kind of drew me in as far as, the possibility of a society like that existing.
Yeah, and I think, and that's really, you can see how something like this could be founded on the right ideals, but how when twisted around for the wrong purposes, things can go horribly awry. And that's what I guess, which Ashley can confirm, is basically the situation that's beginning to happen at the beginning of the Divergent series. And that's not a spoiler, by the way. That's pretty evident from, I think, the first few pages that that's the case. Something specific about abnegation, for example, right? When you read even in the first part of the book, selflessness is something we admire, right? It's great to be selfless. In fact, Katniss is extremely selfless during the Hunger Games, as you see. She's more interested in saving Peeta than herself, or in this case, when she is saving herself, it's only in the event that she thinks her sister and her family need her back in District 12. She's never really thinking about her own personal benefit. In that would be what I consider very honorable selflessness. But imagine if Katniss Everdeen was not ever allowed, other than once every 3 months, Ashley, to look in front of a mirror.
Yeah, I think that's right. 3 months.
Something like that, right? Can't even look at your own reflection in the mirror because that would be considered too vain. I think we're taking it a little bit too far at that point. And so imagine a society that functions like that. And it's really fascinating, and I think a lot of props to Veronica Roth for first of all, sucking you in, the reader in, with a premise that immediately attracts you, and then creates a lot of very fascinating questions as Tris, or Beatrice or Tris, the main character, navigates her way through this world.
So we've kind of addressed abnegation, the selfless, Amity, the peaceful, or Adam described them as hippies. They value kind of peace and friendship. Erudite, we talked a lot about, and their value for intelligence. So the only two that we really haven't spent a lot of time on are candor, which is the honest. So basically, if you're in the candor faction, you have to tell the truth all the time. And, that gets to a point where it can be destructive, even though truthfulness is such a good thing to possess. Like Adam described the other factions going to extremes, it's the same kind of thing. And then Dauntless, I think it's worth talking about because Dauntless does end up playing quite a large role in the series. And Dauntless is built on the virtue of bravery or courage, but they kind of take it to a level that is not necessarily the safest level. What are some of the things that the Dauntless faction does to show their bravery?
Well, lots of things. They are very much the daredevils of the bunch. They, and appearance-wise, they're all tattooed. They all have piercings and all just very kind of rough-looking individuals. And I think their first appearance in the book, I believe, is them basically all jumping off a train and screaming and yelling, which is fairly frowned upon in this society because they're kind of the troublemakers in the series. And, they jump off buildings, they zip line from, the top of, skyscrapers. There's lots of crazy daredevil things.
Did we mention where Divergent is set? Did we say that?
No, I don't think it is, but it's set in Chicago, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's a really kind of cool component of the series is just the setting. I love the idea of having a dystopian series that takes place in one city, and it's a major U.S. city that most of us are, even if we haven't been to Chicago, we're pretty familiar with it. And that just kind of creates a really neat backdrop for the story as it unfolds because it's quite eerie in a way. So much of the city is in ruins or falling apart, and it just, I don't know, it adds a cool component. And Ashley mentioned jumping off the train, so you have some of like the Chicago L that's still running, I guess, and it's, I don't know, it's a cool setting. As Ashley mentioned, the book kind of hinges on the choice that Tris makes regarding which faction she joins. And we're not going to say any more than that because we really don't want to spoil anything. But it's a very, very powerful moment. Shylah, I know that you are a fan of Divergent. You actually crocheted a Divergent blanket, right?
I did.
If you're listening and you do not know this about Shylah, she is an incredible crocheter, and her works are like just stunning, and she sells them on Etsy, and she's really amazing and talented. She actually knitted or crocheted a scarf for Josh Hutcherson, and I'm sure he still has that and still wears it today. But Shylah, what are some of the things that you enjoyed about Divergent?
Well, I think, one of the things that I really liked about the book was I felt like at least the first book, and I haven't read the second book yet. It's on my shelf, waiting. But one of the things I thought was it was a really interesting commentary on kind of where we are with the American educational system, where as teenagers, you're so often, forced into this one track of, you usually only get praise in like one area. So you're really good at math, or you're really good at history, or you're really good at basketball, and you kind of get pushed into this one area of like hyper development. And then you graduate high school, and you either go to college or into the workforce, maybe pursuing this one thing you've kind of been groomed for. And then what happens if, after the fact you realize, one, you're not good at it or not as good as you thought you were, or there's so many people who are better than you that, you're mediocre, this thing that you've always thought you were best in, you're mediocre. Or worse, you're okay at it and you realize you don't like it. And that's what I feel like, Tris kind of finds herself in and her peers is you're pushed, up until this 16th birthday into finding which faction you think you'll be best in. And you make that choice at a very young age, and then you're thrown into sink or swim. Because if you don't like that faction, or you don't fit in, or you're not good enough to run with Dauntless, or not peaceful enough to hang out with Amity, then you're kicked out, and you're basically totally discarded by society, which I thought was a really interesting commentary on where we're pushing, our adolescent people at today. We hyper develop them in one or two particular areas and then throw them out into the real world, into maybe a field or a market that's not realistic. And, I feel like, and maybe that's from me being, someone who's post-college and really finding out that those one or two areas that I felt like I was really hyper-developed in, there's so much else out there. But if you only think you're built for one thing and that one thing doesn't fit you, once you really get into it, where are you? So I thought that's one of the ways I really connected with that first book. I thought, and I don't know if that was Veronica's intent, but I thought it was such an interesting way to explore our secondary education system.